Hello everybody, my name is Meg Spriggs. I am a postdoc researcher at the Centre for Psychedelic Research in London. And today I'm going to give a brief overview on our upcoming clinical trial, which we're very excited about, looking at psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy for anorexia nervosa. So I'll start by just giving a brief outline of what anorexia is. So anorexia is often associated with young women. And it is true that young females are disproportionately affected by the disorder. However, anorexia can affect anyone at any stage of life, with numbers of children and older adults being diagnosed with anorexia increasing. By definition, anorexia is a restriction of energy intake leading to significantly low body weight, an intense fear of gaining weight, and disturbances in the way one experiences their own body, particularly where a great emphasis is put on their own weight and shape. It's somewhat less common than some other mental health conditions, such as depression or anxiety. However, for those who are diagnosed, it is oftentimes a lifelong chronic condition, with less than half of those being diagnosed reaching remission. It has the highest mortality rate of any psychiatric condition, and that's due both to the physical complications associated with low body weight and also high suicide rates. And it's very important to be having this conversation right now, as there's an increased risk of people developing an eating disorder or falling into relapse during the COVID-19 crisis. If you look at the statistics for charity helplines in England and Scotland, across the world, there's been exponential growth in the number of people calling those lines for help. For anorexia, there currently isn't really a lot of consensus on an effective treatment. In terms of therapy, adolescents who are diagnosed with anorexia nervosa are often treated with family-based therapy and adults with CBT. However, they're pretty limited in their efficacy. In terms of medication, anorexia is quite unique in that there's no single approved medication. A work group that was put together in 2011 to review randomized control trials of medications for anorexia found that there were no treatments with a high level of evidence for efficacy. And if we think about why this might be, it's possible that the treatments that we have at the moment tend to generally focus on the symptoms. So oftentimes the most vital symptom to address is the low body weight. So treatment involves weight gain or weight recovery. But it's sort of growing, our understanding is growing that the symptoms might just be somewhat of the tip of the iceberg, and that what we really should be addressing is what's underneath and what's at the core of why someone developed that eating disorder. And that's possibly where psychedelic assisted therapy comes in. So I won't spend a lot of time sort of going into detail on the background of this, as I'm sure that people have a general idea of this. But I will say over the past decade or so, there's been increasing interest in psychedelic assisted therapy. And that's due largely to a number of small-scale trials here at Imperial College London and also at Johns Hopkins and other universities, showing not only the safety and feasibility of using psychedelics in therapy, but also their efficacy across a number of mental health conditions, such as depression, anxiety, and addiction. A lot of these clinical trials use psilocybin, which is the active component in magic mushrooms. And it's structurally similar to the endogenous neurotransmitter serotonin. And its main action is through serotonin type 2A receptors. So what happens when someone comes in for one of our trials? Well, it's important first to recognize that although these are technically drug trials, we see psilocybin as part of a much larger therapy model. And here at Imperial College, similar to other sites doing this research, we use a three-pronged approach to this. So once a participant has been through the screening process, the first thing they'll do is they'll spend some time getting to know their two guides who will be with them throughout the entire process. So during this time, they'll build a relationship with their guides, and their guides will also prepare them for what's to come. So we teach people to navigate the psychedelic experience, as it might be quite new and intimidating to a lot of people. They will then come in for their dosing session. And one of the things we put a lot of emphasis on is the setting in which these dosing sessions take place. So while we are in a clinic, we spend a lot of time making sure that the rooms are nice and comfortable. We use art on the wall, and we dim the lighting, and the patients come in and there's a nice sort of comfy bed, and we give them an eye mask and headphones, and we encourage that people go on an inward journey. They are always in the presence of their two guides, so their guides will be with them the entire day. But we do sort of encourage people to go into their own minds, and their guides are just there really for support. This is then followed by an integration period. So this starts the day after dosing, and it can go on for days or weeks afterwards, when there's an opportunity for the participant to really talk about their experience with their guides, and talk about how they can integrate that experience into their life moving forward. So you might be sort of thinking, well, how does one therapy model work for so many different conditions? And it kind of comes down to possibly how psychedelics work in the brain and how that relates to psychopathology. So one way to kind of view the brain is that it's structured in a very hierarchical fashion, where you get sensory input coming in and is processed through lower sensory areas, and then it's kind of passed forward up the cortical hierarchy. And the brain makes predictions about what it expects to see or experience in the world. And these prior expectations are kind of managed by those sort of higher level areas, and that information then trickles down the cortical hierarchy, and it kind of shapes how the brain processes information at each level. So that means that when sensory input comes into the system and it is passed up that cortical hierarchy, at each level, as I say, it's kind of shaped by your prior expectations. So what this means for possibly psychopathology is that when there might be harmful thinking patterns, that those then shape the way that you experience the world. Say in eating disorders, this could lead to distortions in the way one experiences themselves or their relationship with food. So in 2019, Robin Carhart-Harris and Carl Friston proposed this model, the Rebus model, that suggests that psychedelics work at the level of these priors. And during the acute state, they relax the confines that those priors have on our processing. So when you get sensory input coming in, it's less restricted by what you expect. And that leads to the sort of typical perceptual effects associated with psychedelics, such as the pretty colors and walls breathing. But it also might be how the therapy or how its therapeutic effects work, by relaxing those sort of maladaptive thought patterns. So more formally, what this means is that psychedelics work to relax the precision of high-level prior beliefs, thereby allowing a liberation of bottom-up information flow. And what do we know about psychedelics and eating disorders? Well, there hasn't been a lot of research to date, but the research that there has been is pretty supportive of psychedelics possibly being an effective therapy tool. So there were two case studies, or there have been two case studies. The first was in 1959, where a woman was treated with 2 doses of intravenous psilocybin, and it was concluded from this case that in this patient, psilocybin had an indisputable therapeutic action. In 1996, a case study was reported of a man who had body dysmorphic disorder, and he took psychedelics of his own accord, psilocybin, and he reported that when he was in that acute phase, he no longer saw his distortions. There's also been one qualitative study, which was conducted by Adela France and colleagues, and they interviewed individuals who had been to an ayahuasca ceremony and who struggled with an eating disorder. And they not only found a decline in eating disorder symptoms and psychopathology, but also that people had more self-acceptance and higher self-worth. So maybe that's that, getting at that core underneath the eating disorder symptoms. And very recently, we've published this report demonstrating that following a psychedelic experience, individuals with a reported eating disorder showed decreases in depression symptoms and increases in general well-being. So that's 2 weeks after a psychedelic experience. So with all of that in mind, this is kind of the background of why we're looking at psilocybin as a potential treatment for anorexia nervosa. So in our study that we're performing at Imperial College, the first goal of the study is really to assess feasibility, tolerability. But secondly, we're also interested in efficacy. Is this an effective treatment for people with anorexia nervosa? Secondly, we're interested in those underlying neuronal mechanisms, so we're including neuroimaging, and that includes MRI and EEG. So if you'd like to keep up to date with the process of the trial, you can find it on clinicaltrials.gov, or you can visit our website. So I'd just like to thank Dr. Robin Carhart-Harris and Professor David Nutt, who are supervising this project, Adele LaFrance and Rebecca Park, and all of our collaborators across the UK and the world, the funders of the Centre for Psychedelic Research, and my team at Imperial College London. Thank you.